Have you ever woken up to find strangers building a fence across your own land and claiming it belongs to them? That's exactly what happened to me. One crisp Texas morning, I walked out to feed my cattle and found a crew of men in neon vests hammering stakes right into my pasture. When I asked what they were doing, one of them said, "Redstone Meadows HOA is expanding its community trail." I laughed. "You've got the wrong guy. I'm not even part of your HOA." Then I saw at shiny new signs reading private property, HOA access only, and behind them stood Cheryl Langford, the HOA president, smiling like she owned the sunrise. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "You do now." That was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a takeover. Before we get into the chaos that followed, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. And hey, don't forget to subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this one ends. When you've worked the same soil for decades, you start to feel like the land knows you, and you know it. Every fence post, every ridge, every hoofprint tells a story. My father, John Whitaker, built this ranch from scratch. 240 acres of sweat, debt, and calloused hands. And now, somehow, a woman with a clipboard and an inflated ego thought she could just claim 200 of them because her HOA updated a map. At first, I thought it was some clerical screw-up. Maybe the surveyors misread a plat or transposed a line. It happens. So I walked over to their foreman, a nervous kid, probably in his mid-20s, and asked, "Who hired you?" He said, "Redstone Meadows HOA. We're expanding the public easement." "Public easement," I repeated. "Buddy, this is private pasture. My name's on the deed. Been since 1983. He looked at me helplessly. "Ma'am said it's all cleared with the county." "Ma'am," I muttered, already knowing who he meant. Cheryl Langford, the HOA president, with a voice like a rusted gate hinge and a smile that could slice through barbed wire. Redstone Meadows was a different world. It was the kind of luxury subdivision where people bragged about square footage and wine cellars. Built 5 years ago on what used to be grazing land, it sat right next to my southern fence line. I didn't care much they could play golf in their driveways, for all I cared until they started acting like their homeowners' rules applied outside their little kingdom. It began subtly. A few months before the fence incident, I'd seen a couple of HOA volunteers walking near my property snapping photos. When I asked what they were doing, they said they were documenting community boundaries. I shrugged it off. My land was clearly marked. My father had the original survey done with metal stakes driven deep into the earth. The fence line hadn't moved an inch in 40 years. But the next week, bright orange flags started appearing beyond my fence. At first, I thought maybe the county was doing road work. Then I saw the lettering on the flags, Redstone Surveyors Incorporated. That's when the unease started to crawl up my spine, so I went to the county clerk's office. I brought my deed, my survey, and even a couple of old aerial photos. The clerk, a polite woman named Darlene, confirmed everything was in order. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "your property line hasn't changed. Redstone Meadows HOA stops at the creek. Always has." That was a relief until the next morning when I woke to the sound of chainsaws. 2 contractors were cutting through the mesquite trees along my west fence, laying what looked like survey tape through the middle of my pasture. I grabbed my hat, hopped in my pickup, and drove straight over. "Hey," I shouted, stepping out. "You're on private property." One of them, wearing reflective glasses, said, "We have authorization from Redstone Meadows Homeowners Association. They're extending the scenic trail." I laughed, thinking it was a bad joke. "You realize you're about half a mile past their property line?" He shrugged. "They showed us a new survey. Said, this whole section belongs to them now." I felt my jaw tighten. "Show me the paperwork." He handed me a laminated printout, a color-coded map showing Redstone Meadows shaded in light green. But the green blob extended right into my ranch, swallowing nearly 200 acres like a cancer. "Who drew this?" I asked. He hesitated. "I think the HOA board approved it." I snapped a photo with my phone. "You tell your boss to stop all work right now. You're trespassing." That night I couldn't sleep. The idea of someone redrawing my father's land like it was a coloring book made my stomach turn. I pulled out every document I had, the deed, the tax records, even the plat map from 1983. Everything matched perfectly. The creek was the boundary. Always had been. The next morning I called Cheryl directly. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker," she said in that chipper, condescending tone people use when they're about to tell you something awful. "I understand you're upset, but the HOA board recently voted to expand our scenic easement. It includes a portion of your open pasture." "Portion?" I said, gripping the phone. "You mean 200 acres of private ranch land? You can't just vote to take it." "Well," she replied sweetly, "our updated survey indicates that land was technically within the Redstone parcel when the community was incorporated. We're simply restoring what was always ours. Lady, I said, trying not to lose it, I don't live in your subdivision. I'm not part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. She chuckled softly. Oh, Mr. Whitaker, that's where you're mistaken. The board's decision is binding for all adjacent landowners within the designated district. Designated by who I snapped. By the community vote, she said. I hung up. It was the most absurd thing. I'd ever heard a group of people voting themselves free land like it was a bake sale. Later that afternoon, I drove down to the sheriff's office and spoke with Deputy Reynolds. I explained everything, showed him the map, the deed, and photos of the new signs they'd put up. He sighed, scratching his chin. Jack, this looks like a civil matter. We can't intervene unless there's clear criminal intent. They're literally building on my property, I said. Then document it, he said. Take photos, videos. File a formal complaint with the county surveyor's office. So that's what I did. I bought a drone that same evening and started filming. The footage didn't lie. Their gravel trail cut directly through my property past my water troughs and under the old windmill. A week later, I received a letter in the mail. The HOA had issued me a notice of violation for failing to maintain community fencing standards. I laughed so hard I nearly tore the paper in half. The letter warned that if I didn't restore the fence to HOA-approved appearance, I'd face daily fines of $250. It also said livestock visible from the main road violated community aesthetics. My ranch visible from their road. The nerve. The next morning, I drove straight to the county assessor's office. The clerk there, a thin man with glasses named Howard, looked nervous when I showed him the HOA's map. Where did you get this? He asked. They handed it to the contractors, I said. Why? He leaned closer. This looks unofficial. These parcel numbers don't exist. And that signature, he squinted, isn't from our surveyor. It's been photocopied. That's when I knew Cheryl and her board weren't just arrogant, they were forging documents. But before I could dig deeper, the situation escalated again. One morning, I went to open the water gate leading to the creek and found it padlocked a shiny new chain with a tag that read, Property of Redstone Meadows Maintenance Division. That was the final straw. They'd cut off access to the water my cattle needed. I stood there under the Texas sun, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the heat, gripping that cold steel lock. It wasn't just about the land anymore. It was about principle, about watching a pack of overconfident suburban bullies trample over something they didn't understand. And if Cheryl Langford thought I'd roll over, she was about to find out what happens when you steal from a Whitaker. When people talk about fighting City Hall, they never mention how much paper is involved. It's not pitchforks and torches, it's filing fees, notarized signatures, and letters written in legalese, so dense it could choke a bull. But that's how HOAs wage war, not with bulldozers, but with bureaucracy. After the Watergate incident, I hired an attorney, Michael Boone, a sharp, no-nonsense property lawyer from Lubbock, who'd once sued an HOA for trying to fine a man over his roof color. When I told him what was happening, he raised his eyebrows. Let me guess, he said, flipping through my documents. They redrew the map, filed it quietly, and assumed you'd never notice until it was too late. Exactly. He nodded slowly. It's a classic annexation scam. They try to create a paper trail before you can react. But if we move fast, we can catch them in the act. Michael helped me draft cease and desist letters and sent copies to every member of the HOA board. The letters cited trespass, property interference, and fraudulent boundary representation, basically legal language for get off my land before I sue you into next year. 2 days later, Cheryl fired back. She didn't call. She didn't text. She sent me a certified envelope the size of a phone book filled with HOA violation notices. According to her, I was in violation of Section 7, Subarticle C of the Community Aesthetic Charter for maintaining non-conforming fencing, unauthorized signage, and livestock exposure visible to public spaces. The best part, she enclosed a bill. $9, 250 inches fines. I nearly fell off my chair laughing. I called Michael. You're not going to believe this, he sighed. Oh, I will. They're trying to bury you under paperwork. It's intimidation. Don't pay a dime, but keep every page. It's evidence. And so began what I call the paper war of Redstone Meadows. For every fake violation Cheryl sent, Michael responded with a formal demand for proof. For every notice of dues owed, we sent back copies of my deed plat maps and legal filings showing I wasn't and had never been part of their HOA. But Cheryl didn't back down. Instead, she escalated. A week later, I received another envelope, this time from the county assessor's office. It was a notice of parcel adjustment indicating that my western section had been annexed into Redstone Meadows Community District. The attached map made my blood boil. It was identical to the forged one I'd seen earlier, but now it bore a county seal and an electronic signature. I drove straight to the courthouse, documents in hand. Darlene, the same clerk who'd confirmed my boundary weeks earlier, looked pale when I showed her the papers. "Mr. Whitaker," she whispered, glancing around. "I'm not supposed to talk about this, but the HOA board submitted this under an expedited review program. They said the annexation was pre-approved by the planning department." Pre-approved by who, I demanded. She lowered her voice. "They named Commissioner Harlan as the signatory, but between us, I don't think he ever saw it. His signature looks copied." That was the moment the truth hit me like a branding iron. Cheryl wasn't just bending rules, she was forging them. Michael filed an injunction the same afternoon, halting all HOA construction on my land. But legal filings take time, and Cheryl knew it. Within days, her crew was back dumping gravel, installing trail markers, and even placing a "Welcome to Redstone Meadows Scenic Path" sign right next to my old windmill. I started documenting everything. Every truck, every post, every trespass. I had hours of drone footage, complete with GPS timestamps. When I confronted Cheryl at the site one afternoon, she was dressed like she was running for mayor, white blouse, big sunglasses, clipboard in hand. "Morning, Jack," she said with fake cheer. "I hope you don't mind the improvements. This trail will boost property values for everyone in the district." "There is no district," I said flatly. "Not here. You're trespassing." "Oh, come now," she said, smiling. "You can't fight progress. Once the community sees how beautiful this will be, you'll thank us." "Progress," I said. "You mean theft." Her smile didn't waver. "You really should read the new charter. You might find you're part of something bigger now." That phrase stuck with me, something bigger. That night I realized Cheryl wasn't just after my land. She was building an empire, expanding her HOA's boundaries to inflate her control, her fees, and her reputation. But she'd made one big mistake. She underestimated how stubborn a Whitaker could be. I drove back to the county recorder's office and asked to see every public document filed by Redstone Meadows HOA in the past year. The clerk wheeled out a cart stacked with binders. I spent the next 3 hours flipping through them until I found a file labeled "Redstone Expansion Proposal Pending Approval." Inside were drafts of letters addressed to property owners, most unsigned, and a cover sheet dated 3 months earlier, bearing Cheryl's signature and a typed note, "Revised maps attached for submission under environmental improvement initiative. Goal: integrate adjacent properties for tax sharing purposes." I took photos of every page. When I showed them to Michael, he whistled. "She's using a state environmental grant as cover. That's fraud. And if the county's involved, it's political too. We decided to play it smart. Let them dig their own grave." Michael filed public record requests for all HOA communications with the county. At the same time, I quietly installed trail cameras around the property, capturing every vehicle that crossed my boundary. Within a week, I had footage of HOA board members and contractors hauling construction materials onto my land after dark. Then things got personal. One morning, I found my fence cut clean through wires snipped like someone wanted the cattle to wander. Next to the break was a laminated HOA sign that read "Future Redstone Entry Point." I took photos, dated them, and filed a report. Deputy Reynolds came out again, shaking his head. "Jack, this is starting to look deliberate." "It's criminal," I said. He agreed but looked cautious. "I'll write up a report, but Cheryl's got friends downtown. You'll need hard proof before the DA touches it." "Then I'll get it," I said. By then, word had started spreading among Redstone residents. A few stopped by my gate to apologize. One older man, Mr. Douglas, whispered, "We didn't vote for that trail. Cheryl said it was already approved." "Nobody's seen the budget." That was the first crack in her armor. 2 nights later, I received an email from an anonymous address, truth4redstone@protonmail.com. The subject line read, "You're right about Cheryl." Attached were screenshots of internal HOA emails, Cheryl instructing board members to stay quiet about the annexation project and redirect questions about funding. There was also a spreadsheet labeled trailbudget.xlsx. It listed $1.2 million in land improvements with vendor names that didn't exist. I printed everything, heart pounding. This was it, proof of fraud. The next morning, Cheryl must have sensed something was wrong because she showed up at my gate with 2 men in suits. "Mr. Whitaker," she said coolly, "we've come to offer a settlement." "Settlement," I said. "You mean hush money?" Her eyes flickered. "Let's not be dramatic. The HOA would like to purchase the disputed land, say 200 acres, for fair market value." "Fair market value," I said, leaning on the fence. "You mean the land you already tried to steal? Consider it a win-win," she said, voice tightening. "You get paid. We get our trail. Everyone walks away happy. I looked her dead in the eye. Cheryl, the only thing you're walking away from is a courtroom, she smirked. Then I'll see you there. She turned and strutted back to her white Lexus SUV, gravel crunching beneath her heels. As I watched her drive away, I made a silent promise. I wasn't just going to get my land back, I was going to expose every dirty dollar behind that HOA. And with the evidence piling up, I knew exactly where to start. When you stand up to people who are used to getting their way, they don't back down, they double down. And Cheryl Langford, she was the queen of doubling down. After I refused her settlement, she went from smug to ruthless. The HOA wasn't content with paper warfare anymore. They decided to make my life miserable on the ground. It started small. A few maintenance workers began parking their utility trucks right in front of my ranch gate. They'd sit there for hours, pretending to inspect drainage lines, blocking deliveries and feed trucks from getting through. I asked them politely to move. They said, "We're on community property. Community property." That phrase again, like they were trying to hypnotize everyone into believing it. The following week I woke up to the sound of engines, lots of them. When I walked out onto my porch, I nearly dropped my coffee. A full construction crew was grading the land near the creek bed, the exact section of pasture that marked my southern boundary. Dump trucks, compactors, and orange cones lined the dirt road. They were building a trail. I jumped into my pickup and floored it down there, dust flying behind me. The foreman, the same young guy I'd seen before, was directing traffic. "Who told you to do this?" I shouted. He swallowed hard. "Miss?" Langford said we had authorization. She said the injunction didn't apply because it's an improvement, not an alteration. I almost laughed from disbelief. "You can't pour gravel on land you don't own and call it an improvement," he shrugged helplessly. "You'll have to take it up with her." Oh, I planned to. That afternoon I called Michael Boone, my attorney, and told him what happened. He was furious. "She's in contempt of a standing injunction," he said. "That's criminal." He filed an emergency motion for enforcement and called the sheriff's office to send deputies to the site. But by the time Deputy Reynolds arrived, the damage was done. They had laid nearly 300 yards of gravel and installed 3 benches with shiny brass plaques reading Redstone Meadows, HOA, Preserving Nature for All. Reynolds took one look and muttered, "Jesus Jack. They're not even hiding it." He told the foreman to halt construction immediately and warned Cheryl to stay off the property until the court hearing. Cheryl responded by showing up herself, heels clicking, sunglasses gleaming, that same infuriating smirk plastered on her face. "Deputy Reynolds," she said sweetly, "I believe you're mistaken. This land falls under our community easement. Our records show Reynolds cut her off. Ma'am, those records are under dispute and investigation. You're trespassing until the court says otherwise." Her face darkened. "This is harassment." "No, ma'am," he said. "This is law enforcement." For a moment she just stood there glaring at me like she wanted to melt me with her eyes. Then she turned sharply and stomped back to her Lexus. But I knew she wasn't done. 2 days later I found my water troughs empty. Someone had closed the upstream valve. My cattle were thirsty and restless. I walked up the creek and found fresh footprints, boot prints near the gate that had been padlocked weeks earlier. The lock was gone, replaced with one of theirs. I cut it off with bolt cutters, took photos, and logged the time. Every little thing went into my growing evidence folder, Redstone Violations Chronological. But things escalated from sabotage to open vandalism. One morning I came out to find my fence torn down, not damaged, removed. The posts were stacked neatly like someone wanted to make a point. Nailed to one of the remaining posts was a laminated notice. Per HOA Resolution 14B, unauthorized fencing within the community greenway will be dismantled at owner's expense. That's when something in me snapped. I called Michael. She tore down my fence. He was silent for a second. Then good. Now it's criminal trespass and property destruction. This just became a law case, not civil. He contacted the sheriff's department again, this time demanding a full investigation. Deputy Reynolds came out the same day with his body cam on. He surveyed the scene, whistled low, and said, "She's really pushing her luck." He filed a formal report and recommended the DA review it. But Cheryl still didn't stop. The next weekend, she held what she called a community walkathon, a PR stunt to celebrate the new trail. Flyers went up all over town. When I saw one, I nearly choked on my breakfast. Join us for the grand opening of the Redstone Scenic Trail, stretching across 200 beautiful acres of Redstone Meadows land, my land. The morning of the event, I stood at my gate in disbelief, as hundreds of people, kids, parents, joggers, streamed past no trespassing signs like they didn't exist. HOA volunteers handed out water bottles with Cheryl's face printed on them. I raised my drone and filmed everything: faces, banners, the trail markers. When Cheryl saw me recording, she shouted across the crowd, "Smile for the camera, Jack. It's community history." "You mean evidence," I shouted back. That footage would later become the turning point in my case, but at that moment I was seething. After everyone left, I walked the entire trail. They'd installed solar lamps, benches, and even trash bins, all paid for by community funds. I knew what that meant. Cheryl was using HOA money to make herself look like a hero while literally stealing land. That night, while reviewing the drone footage, I spotted something else: a white SUV parked behind the construction area. The camera zoomed in just enough to catch the license plate Cheryl's. She'd been on site during the illegal work. The next morning, I printed everything: maps, drone, stills, screenshots of HOA, flyers, copies of the forged annexation map, and drove straight to Michael's office. He looked through it all and said, "Jack, we've got her cornered. But we need a witness, someone from inside her operation, who can verify the fraud." That's when I remembered Lydia, the young surveyor I'd met at the county office. She'd been nervous the first time we spoke, but I had a feeling she knew more than she'd said. So I called her. "Lydia, it's Jack Whitaker. I think you were right about the Redstone maps. Can we talk?" There was a pause. Then a quiet, "Meet me after work, not at the office." We met that evening in a coffee shop 2 towns over. Lydia looked anxious, glancing around before sliding a USB drive across the table. "What's this?" I asked. "Proof," she whispered. "I used to work for the engineering firm that handled Redstone surveys. Cheryl asked my boss to adjust the boundary data. He refused, so she found someone else and submitted fake coordinates under our company's name." My stomach turned. "Can you prove it?" She nodded. "Those files show the changes. Date stamps, IP logs, everything. If this goes to court, I'll testify, but I need protection." "She's powerful, Jack. She's got people in the county offices. You'll have it," I promised. As I drove home under the dark Texas sky, I couldn't help but think how insane it all was. An HOA president falsifying maps, bribing officials, cutting fences over land she didn't own. But now I had something she didn't expect: a whistleblower. The next day, Michael reviewed the USB data and almost jumped out of his chair. "This is gold," he said. "We've got digital proof of tampering timestamps and her emails. We can bring this to the DA and maybe even the press." But Cheryl wasn't finished yet. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, I heard engines again. Trucks. I grabbed my binoculars and looked down toward the creek. HOA contractors were back this time, hauling out my old fence posts, tossing them into their trucks. I filmed it all. When one of them noticed my camera, he shouted, "You'll be hearing from the HOA." I smiled grimly. "Yeah," I muttered to myself, "and you'll be hearing from my lawyer." The war wasn't over, but for the first time I knew I wasn't fighting alone. If there's one thing I've learned about bullies in suits, it's that they crumble the moment you start pulling at the threads they hide behind. And Cheryl Langford's threads were starting to unravel faster than she could spin new lies. After Lydia handed me that USB drive, I didn't sleep much. I stayed up half the night watching the files open, one by one, layers of falsified GIS data. GPS coordinates shifted by precise intervals, and emails between Cheryl and a mysterious contact labeled C, Dev Planner. The tone was smug, confident, and damning. "Make sure the western boundary is extended. We'll handle the paperwork later. Funding will clear once the district map is approved. The rancher won't fight once we show him the tax implications." Oh, I was fighting all right. The next morning, I drove straight to Michael Boone's office. He was halfway through his coffee when I walked in, eyes wild, laptop in hand. "You need to see this," I said. 10 minutes later, he leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Jack, this isn't just fraud. This is racketeering. She's using public grant money to inflate her HOA boundaries, then billing it as a public project." I frowned. Public grant money. From where he pointed to a line item in one of the emails: "EPA Rural Greenway Restoration Fund, the Environmental Protection Agency," he said. "She's claiming environmental development funds to build a trail on your ranch." I let that sink in. Cheryl had turned my pasture into her personal piggy bank. Michael called a contact at the state auditor's office, who confirmed that Redstone Meadows had received over $1.4 million in grant money tied to that project. The moment he heard that number, Michael grinned. Well, well. Looks like our HOA queen just became a federal problem. We decided to assemble everything: drone footage, Lydia's USB, the fake annexation maps, photos of vandalism, and even the HOA flyers advertising the community trail. Michael said we needed one more thing to seal the case: a pattern. Proof this wasn't just a one-time mistake. That's when I started hearing from the residents. It began with an older couple, the Douglases, who stopped by my gate one morning. "Mr. Whitaker, Mrs. Douglas said we heard about your dispute. You're not alone. Cheryl's been charging us trail maintenance fees for 2 years now, and we've never seen where that money goes." Her husband nodded. She also doubled our HOA dues without a vote. When we asked for financials, she said the records were confidential. I told them about the investigation, and they almost cried with relief. "We'll testify if you need us," they said. Word spread quickly. Within days, I was getting calls and emails from other Redstone homeowners, people who'd been bullied, fined, or silenced by Cheryl. Some had paid thousands for community improvements that never existed. A retired accountant named Ben Crandall offered to help. He volunteered to review the HOA's financials, saying, "I smell cooked books from a mile away." Ben and I sat at my kitchen table with boxes of printed statements that someone had anonymously dropped off at my gate. Each page was more revealing than the last. Thousands of dollars marked land enhancement contractor fees and miscellaneous maintenance. One vendor name kept appearing, Langford Consulting LLC. Her own company, Ben said, shaking his head. "She's paying herself with HOA funds." We called Michael immediately. He nearly laughed. "Oh, this is beautiful. Self-dealing fraud embezzlement. We can take this all the way to court." But Cheryl must have sensed the walls closing in. 2 nights later, I caught headlights near the fence again. I went out with my flashlight and saw a figure standing near the creek trying to pry one of my private property signs out of the ground. "Hey," I shouted. The figure froze, then bolted toward a waiting SUV. I caught a glimpse of the license plate Redstone HOA staff vehicle. The next morning, Cheryl sent me an email that read, "Cease all harassment of HOA personnel immediately. Continued interference with community operations will result in legal consequences." I almost spat out my coffee. She had the nerve to call me the harasser, but she'd made a fatal mistake. Every time she communicated, every threat, every falsified document, she created a trail, and I was collecting all of it. Michael filed a civil suit for fraudulent annexation, trespass, property destruction, and embezzlement. It named not only Cheryl, but also 2 HOA board members, Thomas Grady, vice president, and Megan Boyd, treasurer. Meanwhile, Lydia went into protective mode. She quit her job at the engineering firm and agreed to meet with a state investigator. She gave a recorded statement confirming that Cheryl had requested data manipulation to shift property lines. Things moved fast after that. Within 2 weeks, the Texas State Auditor's Office sent representatives to Redstone Meadows. They requested full financial disclosure from the HOA. Cheryl tried to stall, claiming the records were temporarily unavailable due to software maintenance. But the auditors weren't buying it. They froze the HOA's accounts pending investigation. When residents learned their dues were being frozen, panic spread. Cheryl called an emergency HOA meeting in the community hall. I wasn't invited, so naturally I showed up. The room was packed, 50 or 60 residents, murmuring nervously. Cheryl stood at the front, microphone in hand, pretending to be calm. "There's been a misunderstanding," she said, voice sugary, sweet. "A few disgruntled individuals have made false accusations about financial impropriety. Rest assured, our records are in perfect order." That's when Ben Crandall stood up. "Then show us," he said. "Open the books." Cheryl froze. "That information is for board review only." "Not anymore," he said, holding up a letter. "State auditors are here. They've frozen your accounts." Gasps filled the room. Cheryl's composure cracked for the first time. "Who gave you that letter?" "Public notice," he said. "It's posted online." The murmurs turned into shouts. People began demanding refunds, resignations, explanations. I stood quietly near the back, arms crossed. When Cheryl finally noticed me, her face turned crimson. "You," she snapped. "You caused this circus." "No," I said evenly. "You did. All I did was tell the truth." She tried to storm off, but 2 state investigators blocked the exit. Miss Langford once said, "We'll need you to come with us to review some documents." She glared at me one last time. "You'll regret this." "I doubt it," I said. That night, the news spread like wildfire. Local media picked up the story, HOA president under investigation for land fraud and embezzlement. The next morning, my phone didn't stop ringing. Journalists, lawyers, even a couple of HOA board members who wanted to cooperate. The empire Cheryl had built on arrogance and deception was collapsing, but I wasn't celebrating yet. Michael warned me, "We're close, Jack, but this isn't over. We need to present airtight evidence in court. One mistake and she'll spin it as misunderstanding." I spent the next week assembling everything into a single binder. Photos, maps, letters, drone stills, invoices, every shred of proof that Redstone Meadows had crossed the line, literally and legally. One evening, while reviewing footage on my porch, Lydia stopped by. She looked lighter, like a weight had lifted off her shoulders. "They interviewed me today," she said. "I told them everything. The emails, the files, even the threats." "Good," I said. "You did the right thing." She smiled faintly. "You know they're talking about opening a full audit of every HOA in the county. You might have started something big." I looked out over the field where the illegal trail used to run now, just a scar of gravel. "Good," I said. "Maybe it's time someone held these people accountable." But deep down, I knew Cheryl wasn't the type to surrender quietly. And if I'd learned anything from this fight, it was that justice comes slow, especially when people with power start losing control. If you've ever stood in the middle of a courtroom staring down someone who spent months trying to destroy your life, you know the strange mix of fear and satisfaction that comes with it. It's not adrenaline, it's something colder. Something that feels like truth sharpening itself before the kill. By the time we got to court, Redstone Meadows had gone from the HOA everyone envied to the one everyone whispered about. News crews camped outside the county courthouse. Drone footage of the illegal trail on my ranch had gone viral after the local station aired it. Even people who didn't know a single thing about property law were rooting for the rancher who fought back. Michael Boone, my lawyer, was calm as ever. He'd spent weeks preparing our exhibits, drone clips, forged maps, Lydia's digital files, and a binder thick enough to stop a bullet. I could tell he was excited, though. He loved taking down bullies, especially the smug, suburban kind. "Remember, he told me before the hearing began, you don't have to out-yell them. You've already got the facts. Let her talk herself into the hole she dug." I nodded. That's never been a problem for Cheryl. Sure enough, she strutted into the courtroom 10 minutes late, surrounded by 2 lawyers in gray suits and a public relations rep holding a notepad. She wore a bright red blazer pearls and that same condescending half-smile that made every sentence sound like an insult. The bailiff called the case Whitaker versus Redstone Meadows Homeowners Association. The judge, an older man named Judge McAllister, peered over his glasses. "All right, folks," he said dryly. "Let's figure out who owns Texas today." A few people laughed. Cheryl didn't. Michael opened with precision. He presented the timeline of trespasses, the false annexation filing the survey manipulation, and finally Lydia's whistleblower statement. He kept his tone calm, even conversational. The power was in the evidence, not the theatrics. When he played the drone footage, the courtroom went silent. The screen showed HOA crews cutting fences, dumping gravel, and planting trail signs marked Redstone Meadows Scenic Route. Each clip was time-stamped and geotagged, impossible to dispute. Then came the emails. Michael projected one on the screen, reading it aloud. "Move the property boundary to include Section 3 pasture. It'll align with the trail plan and expand our district. We'll smooth over the paperwork later." At the bottom, C. Langford. Cheryl's lawyer objected immediately. "Your Honor, this could have been fabricated. There's no proof my client sent that email." Michael smiled slightly. "Except the metadata IP logs and server timestamps provided directly by the HOA's own IT vendor." The objection died in the air. Then Lydia took the stand. She was nervous but steady. Her voice trembled at first, but the more Cheryl's attorney tried to rattle her, the stronger she became. "Yes, I was told to alter the coordinates," she said clearly. "Yes, it came from Miss Langford's office. And yes, the new boundary map was digitally manipulated to make it appear that Mr. Whitaker's land fell under HOA control." When Cheryl's lawyer tried to imply she was lying for attention, Lydia calmly pointed out that she had screen recordings of the map edits complete with timestamps. Michael clicked the monitor, and the jury watched the cursor drag boundary lines across a digital map right into my property. The courtroom gasped. Even Judge McAllister leaned forward. "Miss Langford," he said, adjusting his glasses, "care to explain why your HOA was drawing lines through private ranch land?" Cheryl cleared her throat, her voice shaky but defensive. "It was a misunderstanding. We believed the land was unincorporated, and we were following environmental guidelines for public access." "Unincorporated," the judge repeated. With a deed recorded since 1983, Cheryl's lips pressed into a thin line. Her lawyer whispered something, but the damage was done. Michael stood. "Your Honor, we also have financial records linking HOA funds to personal accounts under Langford Consulting LLC. Over $400,000 was transferred during the trail. Project records show Miss Langford as the managing member." Cheryl's composure cracked completely. "That money was reimbursement for consulting work?" she snapped. Michael raised an eyebrow. "Consulting work for yourself?" The courtroom broke into whispers. The judge banged his gavel for order, but even he couldn't hide the hint of amusement on his face. We recessed for lunch after that, and as I stepped outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed. Cameras flashed. One woman shouted, "Mr. Whitaker, what do you have to say to the people watching your case across the country?" I smiled faintly. Just that land's not something you take, it's something you earn. When we returned for the afternoon session, Cheryl tried a new tactic: pity. Her lawyer painted her as a well-meaning community leader who had been misled by bad contractors. He blamed administrative confusion, clerical error, and even hinted that I had misrepresented my property boundaries to gain sympathy. But then Michael dropped the final bomb. He played the recording from Cheryl's own HOA meeting, the one Ben had captured with his phone weeks earlier. In it, Cheryl could be heard saying, "The rancher's too stubborn to sell. Once the trail's built, he won't have a choice. He'll fall in line eventually." The jury didn't even try to hide their reactions. One woman shook her head, another muttered, "Wow." Cheryl sat frozen eyes darting around the room like she was searching for an escape hatch. Michael turned to the judge. "Your Honor, we rest our case." When the verdict came 2 days later, it was unanimous. The court found Redstone Meadows HOA and its president Cheryl Langford guilty of fraudulent annexation document falsification and criminal trespass. The HOA was ordered to pay $350 0 inches restitution for property damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. Cheryl herself faced a separate criminal investigation for embezzlement and falsifying public records. I didn't cheer. I didn't need to. Watching her signature empire collapse under the weight of her own arrogance was enough. As Cheryl was escorted out of the courtroom, she glanced back at me with a look I'll never forget, half hatred, half disbelief. I just tipped my hat. Outside, the reporters were waiting again. Someone shouted, "Jack, what will you do now that you've won?" I looked at the camera and said, "Fix my fences and make sure no one ever crosses them again." A week later, the Redstone Meadows HOA board resigned en masse. A new interim committee took over, promising transparency and audits. Lydia got a job offer from the State Survey Department. Michael told me the DA was opening a full investigation into county corruption tied to Cheryl's project funding. As for me, I got my land back, every acre, every fence post, every inch. I spent the following weekend rebuilding the southern fence, driving the posts deep into the ground like my father had taught me. When I was done, I hung a big wooden sign at the gate: "Private land, not HOA property." People passing by honked and waved. Some even stopped to take photos. It became something of a symbol, a reminder that sometimes standing your ground literally means standing your ground. That evening, I walked the fence line with Daisy, my old cattle dog, trailing behind me. The sunset painted everything gold. The air smelled of mesquite and victory. But I also felt something heavier, a realization that for every Cheryl I'd defeated, there were probably dozens more out there doing the same thing to people who didn't have lawyers, drones, or whistleblowers. I made myself a promise right there at that fence I'd help anyone else who went through this kind of abuse. I'd tell my story until no one ever let an HOA bully steal their life's work again. The ranch was quiet again, peaceful for the first time in months. The fake trail had been removed, the gravel hauled away. The scars were still there, but they told a story, now a story of resistance, truth, and the stubbornness it takes to protect what's yours. And in Texas, that's about the highest compliment you can earn. Victory, I discovered, doesn't come with trumpets and confetti. It comes with paperwork, court orders, and the slow, quiet satisfaction of watching justice roll downhill and crush everyone who thought they were untouchable. The day after the verdict, I woke to a still morning. No engines, no surveyors, no HOA trucks idling by the gate. Just the wind through the grass and the low rumble of cattle somewhere beyond the creek. For the first time in almost a year, my land felt mine again. But I also knew this wasn't the end, it was the aftershock. When a storm like Cheryl Langford's breaks, it doesn't just disappear. It leaves wreckage, and that wreckage has names. A few days later, Michael called. "Jack," he said, his voice calm but edged with satisfaction, "you might want to pick up a copy of the Tribune." I drove into town, grabbed the morning paper from the rack outside the diner, and there it was, front page bold headline: HOA, president charged with felony fraud, $1, 4M, in funds unaccounted for. The story went deep. Cheryl, along with her treasurer Megan Boyd and vice president Thomas Grady, had been indicted for falsifying property records, embezzling HOA funds, and obstructing a state audit. The state prosecutor's statement was scathing. This was not a misunderstanding. This was calculated theft under the guise of community improvement. I couldn't stop smiling. Michael told me the DA's office had issued search warrants for Cheryl's home and the HOA headquarters. They found digital ledgers, hidden accounts, and this part made me laugh, a locked cabinet labeled personal consulting files. When the agents pried it open, they found dozens of unfiled invoices and handwritten notes with entries like trail expansion, use Whitaker's section pending compliance, and push surveyor faster, county clerk cooperative. She documented her own downfall like a villain keeping a diary. The legal fallout was brutal. Cheryl's assets were frozen. Her husband Greg Langford filed for divorce within a week, citing irreconcilable fraud. He moved out of their McMansion, which was later listed online price reduced 3 times in 2 months before anyone would touch it. The HOA board collapsed completely, and Redstone Meadows entered what the county called a restructuring phase, which was bureaucratic code for, "We're cleaning up a dumpster fire." I thought that would be the end of it, until one morning a brand new white envelope arrived in my mailbox. It wasn't from the county. It wasn't from Michael. It was from Cheryl. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. "Congratulations, cowboy. You got what you wanted. I hope you enjoy your dusty pasture. You think you won, but all you did was make enemies in high places. This isn't over. No signature, no return address. Just bitterness on stationery that probably cost more than my truck tires." I took a deep breath, folded the note, and slid it into my evidence folder. Let her keep writing. She'd already written her own ending. Meanwhile, the community around me was changing. Redstone residents, finally free from Cheryl's chokehold, started showing up at my gate, not with threats but with thank yous. One woman, Mrs. Douglas, the same neighbor who'd warned me about the fake fees, brought me a homemade pecan pie. "You saved us," she said, pressing the tin into my hands. We were all too scared to stand up to her. "You did what nobody else could." I smiled. "Ma'am, I didn't do it for you. I did it because that woman tried to steal my father's fence line. But I'll take the pie anyway." Word spread. The new HOA committee, formed by a handful of decent, level-headed homeowners, invited me to one of their first meetings. I went mostly out of curiosity. They'd moved the venue from the stuffy community hall to the local library. No banners, no catered refreshments, no HOA Vision slideshow, just folding chairs and a sense of embarrassment hanging in the air. The new president, a soft-spoken teacher named Laura Jenkins, stood up and said, "Mr. Whitaker, we owe you an apology. You warned us and we didn't listen. If it helps, we've dissolved all the expansion plans. Your land is safe." I nodded. "Appreciate that, ma'am. Let's keep it that way." It was awkward but sincere. For the first time, I believed Redstone might learn something from all this. A month later, I stood back on my land as a crew this time. County approved, removed the last remnants of the illegal trail. The gravel was trucked away, the benches pulled out, and the fake HOA scenic path signs tossed into a dumpster. Watching those signs go felt cathartic, like finally shaking off a bad dream. Michael called a few days later with more good news. The court had finalized the restitution order. I'd be receiving $350,000 compensation for damages, lost productivity, and legal expenses. "You can rebuild anything you want, Jack," he said. I told him I already had something in mind. 2 months later, right where the old fake trail once cut through my pasture, I built a new fence, taller, sturdier, 8 feet high, lined with steel posts and security lighting. Not to keep people out, but to remind everyone where the line was. On it, I hung a big clean-cut sign carved from Oak Whitaker Ranch private property, "Trespass at your own risk." And right beneath it in smaller letters, "Boundaries matter." Neighbors stopped to take pictures. The sheriff himself, Deputy Reynolds, drove by one afternoon, tipped his hat and said, "Looks good, Jack. Shame you had to teach the whole county how to read a map." We both laughed. Cheryl's criminal trial came a few months later. I didn't attend, but Michael did. He told me she pled guilty to reduced charges, fraudulent record alteration, and misappropriation of funds, and received 12 months of probation plus $8, 500 inches. Personal restitution to me. It wasn't the jail sentence some hoped for, but it was still a reckoning. She'd lost everything, her title, her reputation, her house, and the illusion of control she'd built around herself. I thought about that a lot, how people like Cheryl always believe they're the smartest in the room until the truth catches up. It's funny how quiet the HOA got after she left. The new board kept their distance from me, but every now and then I'd see Laura Jenkins drop off a newsletter at the gate. It was full of gardening tips and bake sale announcements, nothing about annexations or community improvements. That's how it should have been from the start. Life on the ranch returned to normal. I repaired the windmill, restocked my cattle, and planted mesquite along the southern boundary again. Every evening I'd walk that fence line with Daisy at my heels just to remind myself what we fought for. Sometimes, though, I'd catch a glimpse of something in the distance, a white SUV parked at the far edge of the road watching. It never stayed long. I figured Cheryl still liked to look at what she couldn't own. One evening after sunset, I stood on the hill overlooking the property. The lights from Redstone Meadows twinkled in the distance like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. Beneath those manicured lawns and fresh-painted houses, there were cracks. Cracks where the truth had leaked in and changed things. The peace felt earned, not given. As I turned to head home, Daisy barked once, short, sharp, almost like approval. I patted her head. "We did all right, girl," I said. "We kept the line." And for the first time in a long time, I slept like a man who didn't owe anyone an explanation. For a while, everything was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels heavy, like the land itself is catching its breath after a long fight. The fences stood firm. The pastures were green again. Even the cattle seemed calmer, as if they knew the chaos was finally behind us. But one thing about peace, you never quite trust it when it comes too easy. It was late summer when I got the call that would flip everything one more time. Michael Boone's voice was steady but serious. "Jack, you sitting down." "Not usually," I said, leaning against the porch rail. "What's wrong now?" "I just got a notice from the Department of Justice. They're expanding the investigation." Into what I asked. "Cheryl's already done." "HOA's broke. What's left to dig up?" "That's the thing," he said. "It's not just Cheryl. Turns out the HOA wasn't working alone. He emailed me the documents." My stomach dropped when I opened them. The so-called Redstone Trail project, the same one Cheryl used to justify bulldozing my land, wasn't just an HOA vanity project. It was part of a federal environmental grant administered through the County Development Office, the same office that had quietly approved her forged annexation map. In other words, Cheryl's scam had been connected to a larger Machine County officials using fake boundaries and green infrastructure projects to claim grant money, then pocketing the surplus. My ranch had just been their most convenient cover story. Michael continued, "You might want to sit on this for now. They're building a case. But Jack, it's big, bigger than the HOA. You may have just blown open the largest land fraud operation in this part of the state." I let out a low whistle. "Well," I said, "I always figured she had friends in high places. Guess those friends are about to have some bad days." Over the next few months, federal investigators swarmed Redstone Meadows. They pulled county records, subpoenaed bank transactions, even hauled away boxes of files from the planning department. Word spread fast. The county commissioner, Harold C. Harlan, had resigned under pressure. 2 clerks were fired. The engineering firm that originally signed off on the fake survey was shut down. And me, I got another letter this time from the DOJ. It wasn't a warning or a subpoena. It was a thank you. "Mr. Whitaker, your diligence and documentation were crucial in uncovering significant misuse of federal grant funds. We appreciate your cooperation and integrity throughout this investigation. United States Department of Justice Land Integrity Division." I laughed when I read it. After a year of being painted as the angry rancher, it felt good to see the word integrity in writing. When Michael heard, he said, "You realize you just took down a federal grant racket, right? Not bad for a guy who claims he's not part of any HOA. Guess I'm honorary president of the No HOA Association," I said. That line became a running joke in town. Folks at the diner started calling me President Whitaker every time I came in. Someone even printed a t-shirt that said, "No ho, no nonsense." But deep down, I knew what it really meant. What started as one woman's arrogance had revealed something much uglier: how power hides behind paperwork. How people can build entire empires by twisting words like community and progress until they mean control. Still, I wasn't bitter, just wiser. One afternoon, a black government SUV pulled up by the gate. A federal agent stepped out, clean-cut and polite. "Mr. Whitaker," he said, "we wanted to give you this in person." He handed me a framed certificate from the Department of Justice. It wasn't fancy, but it meant something: citizen recognition for contributions to land integrity and public accountability. I stood there staring at it while the wind moved the grass around my boots. "Funny," I said. "Didn't think feeding cattle would ever get me a thank you from Washington." The agent smiled. "Most people don't document things the way you did, sir. You'd be surprised how many folks give up when people like her push hard enough." I nodded. "Yeah, well, around here when a bull charges, you don't run, you plant your boots." He smiled again and drove off, leaving a trail of dust behind him. That night, I poured a glass of whiskey, sat on the porch, and looked out across the land. The new fence gleamed under the moonlight, the wood fresh and clean. Beyond it, the empty stretch where the trail used to be was returning to grass again, swallowing every trace of what happened. I thought of my father. He used to say, "The land remembers who takes care of it." Maybe that's why I fought so hard. Because in the end, it wasn't just about borders or maps, it was about respect. respect for the work that built this place, respect for boundaries literal and moral. A few weeks later, I got an invitation from the new Redstone Meadows HOA board. They wanted me to attend their first official transparency meeting. I almost said no, but curiosity got the better of me. When I walked into the community hall, things were different. No banners, no pomp, just a small crowd of nervous homeowners sitting in folding chairs. Laura Jenkins, the new president, stood at the front. She smiled when she saw me. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, "thank you for coming. We just wanted to say, we're sorry for everything, and we want you to know we've made some changes. The HOA bylaws now require public audits, open meetings, and term limits." "That's good," I said. "Accountability keeps things honest." She nodded. "It was hard for people to face what happened, but we're trying to rebuild trust." "You helped make that possible." I could tell she meant it. So I smiled, tipped my hat, and said, "Just keep your trails off my pasture, and we'll get along fine." The room laughed. Before I left, Laura said softly, "Cheryl called from probation last week. She asked me to tell you something." I raised an eyebrow. "She's still talking," she said. "Tell Whitaker I underestimated him." I chuckled. "That's the smartest thing she's ever said." On the way home, the sun was setting over the hills. It cast long, golden light across the fields, the kind of light that makes everything look honest again. When I reached the gate, I stopped to look at the sign I'd carved after the trial: "Private land, not HOA property." Below it, I'd added something new just last week, a smaller wooden plaque that read, "Truth is the best fence," because in the end, that's what saved me. Not lawyers, not luck, but proof. Hard evidence and harder patience. The land was peaceful again. But I knew the story wasn't just mine anymore. Neighbors from 2 counties over had already started calling me for advice about their own HOA problems. I told them all the same thing: document everything, stay calm, let them hang themselves with their own paperwork. It worked for me. As night settled over the ranch, the stars came out one by one. Daisy lay by my feet, her head on her paws, snoring softly. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. I smiled, raising my glass toward the horizon. "To boundaries," I said quietly, "and to the fools who think they don't matter." And maybe that's the real lesson in all this. Sometimes the line you draw isn't just a fence, it's the line between justice and corruption, between what's yours and what someone else tries to take. So if you ever find yourself up against the powerful, the petty, or the paper pushers, remember this story. Remember that the truth doesn't need permission to stand its ground. Because in the end, the land always knows who it belongs to. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about pride, it's about peace. Jack's fight wasn't against a person. It was against a system built on arrogance, manipulation, and greed. He proved that truth, persistence, and evidence are the strongest weapons any ordinary person can wield. When people try to take what's yours, your land, your voice, your dignity, don't fight with anger. Fight with proof. Keep records. Stay calm. Let justice catch up at its own pace. Because when it does, it hits harder than any revenge ever could. Every fence, every boundary, every inch of ground we defend means something. It's not just about ownership, it's about self-respect. What would you have done if someone tried to steal 200 acres of your land? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story made you believe in standing up for what's right, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share so more people hear stories like this. There's always another HOA somewhere thinking they can take what isn't theirs. Let's make sure they think twice.